Do you want me to start, or are you going to say something first?
I can start.
Okay, you start and then throw it to me.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to take a few minutes to let everybody join us. I see you guys trickling in. Thank you so much for coming to the webinar. We'll get started in just a few moments. Thank you all very much for coming. We're just seeing a few more people trickle in. We will get started in about 120 seconds. Okay, welcome to Learn How to Prepare Your Building and Collections with experts from the National Weather Service. My name is Lauren Hanley. I'm the Director of Disaster Services at the Houston Arts Alliance. And we wanted to thank everyone for coming today. If you don't know about us, the Houston Arts Alliance is a service organization that serves the arts and cultural community of Houston and the surrounding areas. We have a disaster services program that provides, works with people like TX-CERA and the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training to provide webinars like this. You can find out more about us and what we do at ready.haatx.com. There's also a lot of ways that you can prepare yourself and your organization for disaster there to help you out. Just a couple of housekeeping things. We are recording today. This recording will be available on the HAA website, on YouTube, as well as through TX-CERA and NCPTT. It will be available a lot of places. And if you have trouble finding it, you can always contact any of the people you see on your screen to help you with that. With all that being said, thank you again for coming, and thank you to our partners, TX-CERA and National Center for Preservation Technology and Training for doing this with us. And I'm going to hand you over to Mary.
Hello, and welcome this afternoon. My name is Mary Striegel, and I'm Chief of the Materials Conservation Program at the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training, which is an office of the National Park Service. The National Center helps preservationists find better tools, better materials, and better approaches to conserving historic buildings and landscapes, archaeological sites, and materials collections. We are thrilled to be a host of the webinar today, along with our partners, the Houston Arts Alliance and the Texas Collections Emergency Resource Alliance. We welcome you to this webinar. And now I'll turn it over to Melanie Stanford.
Welcome, Melanie here. I'm the current president of TX-CERA, which is the Texas Collections Emergency Resource Alliance. We are volunteers, all volunteers here in the Texas area that help to guide, teach, triage on site, whatever is needed within collections here in Texas. And so I just wanted to thank NCPTT for partnering with us again this year on this webinar, as well as the Houston Arts Alliance for joining us. It should be a pretty good webinar. We have some great speakers for you with our Steve Pine, our board member, moderating. So I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say. Thank you and enjoy.
Thank you, Melanie. This is a list of contributors that have assisted in spreading the word and are partners in all of our efforts to make information available and to be available to help when help is needed. I'm Steve Pine. I'm Senior Conservator for Decorative Arts at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. And I'll be making introductions and being involved in the question and answer session a bit later. And what I'd like to do at this point is introduce our first speaker, who is Dan Reilly. He's the Warning Coordination Meteorologist with NOAA at the National Weather Service, Houston, Galveston. He's been there since 2008. He works with emergency managers, the media, local offices and governments in weather alerting, forecasting, and preparedness. He has a 28-year career with the service and holds an MS in meteorology from MIT. He's a great speaker, knows a ton, and I'm eager to hear what Dan can say about forecasting what we might expect this upcoming storm season. Dan?
Well, welcome. The presentation's recorded, so think of questions you might have, and we'd be happy to answer them. Good afternoon. This is Dan Reilly with the National Weather Service, the Houston Galveston office. I'd like to speak to you today about the 2020 hurricane season in review and a look ahead to 2021. Satellite photo here shows Hurricane Laura over the Gulf there. You can also see the city lights along the Gulf Coast. So let's go ahead and get started. So to say last year was an active season would be an understatement. It was the most active season on record in terms of the number of named storms, and second to first in terms of the number of hurricanes. You can see all the tracks there in the Atlantic Ocean, and notice all the activity in the Gulf of Mexico. Very, very active in the Gulf. The only comparable year was 2005, when we had 28 named storms and 15 hurricanes. And as I said, in 2020, we had 30 named storms and 13. You can see there were 5 landfalls in Louisiana alone. They really were the ground zero last year for hurricanes. Here's a look at satellite images of all of our storms. You can see all 30 there in a mosaic, all the way from Arthur to Iota. And no, Iota is not a normal name for a hurricane. The Greek alphabet is used in hyperactive storms when we have more than 21 named storms. And this was the only year other than 2005 that we've ever had to do that. So looking ahead, what are our named storms going forward? First, in the upper right, you can see all the names crossed off that were used. We still had quite a few Greek letters that could have been used in theory, but 30 is certainly enough as far as the number of named storms. The lists of names are predefined for 2021 all the way out to 2026. And then the 2021 list will be used again in 2027. However, a name may be retired if it makes a big impact. So, for example, last year, Laura was retired. It had such a big impact on the United States, there will never be a Hurricane Laura again. But if the name is not retired, the list will be reused every 7th year. Now, one change this year, the Greek alphabet will no longer be used for a hyperactive season like we had last year. Instead, there's an alternate list not shown here that can be pulled from as needed. So in the unlikely event we get more than 21 named storms, in other words, on the 2021 list, if we go beyond Wanda, we won't go to the Greek alphabet, we'll go to a separate list. Here's another way to look at hurricane activity and compare 2020 to the other years using this bar chart where the purple indicates the number of major hurricanes category 3 or higher, the red indicates the number of hurricanes, and then the gray indicates the number of named storms, which of course includes hurricanes and tropical storms. And you can see in terms of number of named storms, 2020 was a year without equal. 2005, however, was right behind with 28 named storms, and 2005 actually had more hurricanes. You may remember 2005 was the year we had Katrina and Rita, so very, very impactful year as well. But when you get beyond that, every other year is nowhere close to as busy as we were in 2020. Looking at the landfalls last year, you can see all the landfalls along the Gulf Coast, just very, very busy all along the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida, where Louisiana was hit especially hard. Look at all the landfalls there in the state of Louisiana, 5 there alone. This is another way to look at the season last year. Basically, it counts the number of hours spent in a Hurricane Center 5-day forecast cone. And from this you can see very clearly Louisiana is all lit up. They were really ground zero for many hurricanes, often in the forecast track. But you can see really most of the southeastern U.S. and much of the East Coast spent some time in a Hurricane Center forecast cone. But really what lights up there is far east Texas across Louisiana and into Mississippi. Yet another way to look at how widespread the activity was last year. These are some of the watches and warnings from a number of these storms. You can see the names listed along the coast. And pretty much every county along the coast, almost, was under some sort of hurricane watch or warning, or at least a tropical storm warning. And what else do we have there? In pink, we have storm surge warnings. So the Gulf Coast, of course, was hit especially hard. Probably the Florida Panhandle the least so last year. But really, every county from Brownsville up to eastern Maine was under some sort of tropical watch or warning last year. And then I won't read all these, but you can see some of the numbers for 2020. 13 hurricanes, the average is 6. 6 major hurricanes, the average is 3. 12 storms hit the U.S. coast. The previous record was 9. So not only did we have a lot of storms, many were impactful hitting the coast, and 5 in Louisiana alone. 10 storms formed in September. That's the most for any month on record. And this is important. We had 10 rapidly intensifying storms, meaning they went from a weaker storm to a much stronger storm very quickly. And those can be especially dangerous, as we know, especially if that rapid intensification occurs near the coast and is not forecast. And you can see there are 30 named storms. Let's look at a few specifically, especially those that impacted the Texas coast. This was Hurricane Hannah back in late July, and you could see that swirl there. You can see the hurricane making landfall there in South Texas. What are we looking at there? We can see the swirling circulation, the counterclockwise swirl of the hurricane, and then that little hole in the middle of that pattern is the eye of the storm. This was a Category 2 hurricane, actually a Category 1 hurricane, making landfall, produced a lot of high winds down the coast and also some high surf not only in South Texas, but all the way up the coast. Hurricane Laura was probably the most frightening storm for the Houston-Galveston region. This was a very strong storm, a Category 4 on the Saffir-Simpson hurricane wind scale. And for a while, it looked like it could track right into Galveston. Just for reference, the 1900 hurricane in Galveston, which led to the largest loss of life from any natural disaster in our nation's history, that was a Category 4 as well. So a lot of nervous time as this storm tracked toward the Texas coast. Eventually, it did turn to the right, and the center rode up the Louisiana side of the Texas-Louisiana line and impacted Louisiana most severely. There was still some heavy surf and high tides on the Texas coast, but there were really some areas of devastation across Louisiana, including Lake Charles. Here's a still shot of a radar image from Hurricane Laura. You can see Lake Charles there, and I've sampled some of the points there on the radar, actually showing 155 mile-per-hour winds just off the surface. The radar is measuring those, and you can see the eye is actually over Cameron at this time, and then Lake Charles is in the northern part of what we call the eye wall. The ring around the eye, referred to as the eye wall, that's where the highest winds in the hurricane are found. Now, this was the last image that the radar took, and you might guess why. The radar was taking on some of these 150 mile-per-hour plus winds at this time. And you can see the impact on the radar from the winds of Laura. Before, on the left-hand side, you can see what the radar looks like. That big dome up top is a ray dome, hollow, and on the inside you have a very large radar dish. And then after Laura, it was pretty much destroyed. So it took months to repair that radar and bring it back online, but thankfully it is back in operational now. This is the National Weather Service Lake Charles Weather Service radar. Looking at the analyzed wind speed field, I think you'll find this interesting. You can see those 140 mile-per-hour winds concentrated there on the southwest Louisiana coast. But if you go just 100 miles out to the west of there, the winds are quite light, only 30 miles per hour or less. So places like Houston and Galveston, even though Category 4 winds were only 100 miles away, they saw very little wind here and no rain in the Houston-Galveston area. So a lot of people were probably wondering, where is that hurricane? And the truth is, this is not that uncommon to see a very concentrated high wind field. And so if you're near the center or near that eye wall region, you're going to get those high winds. But if you're well outside of that, the winds may be considerably less. The next storm to take a look at, a much different storm. This one was weaker in terms of the winds. This is Tropical Storm Beta, and it made landfall in September. You can see the dates there. It came in as a weak tropical storm, or only 40 mile-per-hour maximum winds, and even that may be generous. So this did not have a big wind impact on the coastline, but what this did, it moved very slowly. And so there were some areas of very heavy rainfall and flooding. In fact, we had some locations up to 15 inches, maybe even a bit more. So let's take a look at that. And you can look at the radar data and estimate a rainfall. You can see the city of Houston here in this area of reds and purples is a band of very high rainfall amounts. In fact, you can see some pixels in there of 16 to 20 inches of rain. And this is falling in an urban area, so no surprise. Here, like places like Friendswood, Pearland, Bel Air had quite a bit of flooding from this very, very heavy rain band. And then most areas had a more manageable 4 to 8 inches. So this is not uncommon with slow-moving tropical systems to have very heavy rain bands leading to flooding. Of course, Hurricane Harvey was an extreme example of that, where we had some locations with 4 to 5 feet of rainfall. Next storm I want to look at is Hurricane Delta, and notice the date on this. This is October, about October 5th to October 10th. And this storm ended up making landfall at a location very similar to Hurricane Laura over southwest Louisiana again. So those poor folks had just had a Category 4 hurricane with Laura, and now we're looking at another powerful hurricane with Hurricane Delta. Delta did not quite have as high winds as Laura did, but they were Category 2 winds and very strong and damaging. The other thing about Delta is the wind field was larger, and I'll show you that in a moment. So you can see the satellite image here, Delta swirling away to the south of the Louisiana and Texas coasts. And again, this was a very close call for Houston, Galveston. So let's look at the analyzed wind field now, and notice the maximum wind speeds 90 to 100 miles per hour, not the 140 plus we saw with Laura. However, in this case, those higher winds extended much further west. So the point I want to make here is every storm is different. This one was a little bit weaker in terms of the highest winds, but it was larger. So there were some high-end tropical storm winds being felt even down in Galveston and on Bolivar Peninsula and along Galveston Bay. We were seeing wind gusts of 40 to 60 miles per hour. And then finally, to show you that the hurricane season can extend well into October and even through November, we had Hurricane Zeta, a late October storm. You can see the dates there, October 25th through October 28th. The track there, I should have pointed this out earlier. What do the colors mean on the track? The red swath indicates hurricane force winds, the yellow 58 mile per hour winds, and the blue tropical storm or 39 mile per hour sustained winds. So you can see that track into, in this case, southeast Louisiana on into Mississippi. So what's changing for this year? One thing I recommend during the hurricane season is looking at hurricanes.gov. That's the National Hurricane Center website. And they're going to start issuing the tropical weather outlooks there routinely on May 15th. They used to start on June 1st, which is the nominal start of hurricane season. But for the past 5 years or so, there have been storms before June 1st. So in recognition of that, they're going to start issuing those routine forecasts earlier. It doesn't mean the hurricane season is starting earlier. It still officially starts June 1st, but just be aware of that. As I mentioned, the Greek alphabet will not be used anymore. We talked about that. And then there's some other things there as well. Another thing I forgot to mention, I mentioned the normal number of hurricanes is 12, but they've just revised those normals to include the last 10 years. And so now the new normal number of named storms is 14, so that's gone up. So that's another change. And again, this just explains the change on hurricanes.gov when looking at the tropical weather outlook, and I recommend you all do that pretty much on a daily basis as we get to late May. You can see here the change in the number of the normals for a normal hurricane season, typically 30 years. They're computed over 30-year periods, and they get updated every 10 years. So now that we're in 2021, we're looking at the period of 1991 to 2020 as our period of record. And you can see that we've jumped from 12 to 14, 6 hurricanes to 7, and the number of major hurricanes stays the same. So what is the forecast for this year? The NOAA forecast is to be released on May 20th, but we do have some forecasts that have been issued, including the one from Colorado State, and they've been doing it the longest, and they are forecasting for a more active than normal season with 17 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 4 major. So for what it's worth, and in the lower right, you can actually look at a number of other groups and universities that have made forecasts, and they're all coming in pretty much above average. So take that for what it's worth. One thing I want to point out, even if we had a very low number of named storms, if we get a direct hit from just one, it's a very active year. So these outlooks are kind of interesting, but we have to prepare the same way every year. And you can see some links there in the lower left that you can investigate. So here we have some more websites and Twitter and Facebook feeds and YouTube sites that would love to have y'all get familiar with, bookmark, and this is the best way to stay informed during the hurricane season. You can see my email there and my phone number. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And that is all I have.
Well, thanks so much, Dan.
Good afternoon.
Okay, we'll try to stay on our schedule and save our questions for the end. We are logging in whatever comes in on the question and answer tabulation at the top of your screen. So we'll try to get to everything that we can after the speakers have all had a chance to make their presentations. Next up will be Jason Church, who's Chief of Technical Services for the National Center for Preservation Technology and Training. Jason leads a research team that undertakes analysis and documentation of cultural objects. He is a first responder for cultural resource disasters, having been deployed as part of the National Heritage Responders with the American Institute for Conservation after several hurricanes. So Jason knows very intimately what we're speaking. And Jason holds a Master's of Art in Historic Preservation from the Savannah College of Art and Design. And Jason, please take it away.
Hello, my name is Jason Church, and in my portion of this presentation, I'm going to talk about preparing your building for a disaster, both prior and after the disaster. So the first thing we want to talk about is being proactive and not reactive. So all the things that we're going to talk about first are things that you should do before there's an emergency of any kind. You want to plan and be ready in the event that there is one, because pretty good likelihood at some point you're going to need this. We're going to talk about the types of disasters or emergencies, things we can do to plan, how to be prepared, and then re-entry into the building. So the first thing is, what's the difference between an emergency and a disaster? So when we think about emergencies, this is probably what's most likely to occur. These are things like a water main broke, a sprinkler head broke. I've worked in sites that had very mundane things like the drain from the air conditioner backed up and leaked into the space. I worked at one site where they lost a significant amount of architectural plaster work because of a simple air conditioning leak. That's more likely. So that's the kind of thing we really want to focus on. And, of course, the things that we talk more about are the disasters. Hurricanes, ice storms, tornadoes, large scale. So emergencies are highly probable. Usually there's a minor impact. It's very localized. One room gets damaged that was under a water supply, for example. And very specific response. We need to do this because this happened. Whereas a disaster, it's not as probable that you'll have this issue. If you're not in a hurricane-prone or tornado-prone area, probably not a big concern for you. But usually when this happens, it's very wide scale. We don't have a single room that was damaged. We have the entire bottom floor, the entire top floor, the entire building. So a much larger response is needed, a lot more wide range of needs, things like that. So again, remember, we want to be proactive and not reactive. So we got to know our building. And this is very important. This is your building. Where do you turn the gas off? Do you even have gas? Where are the electrical panels? And that could mean, how do we turn the outlets off in gallery 3, but it could also mean, how do we shut the entire building down? Where's our main supply? Where's our zoned switches? Are they labeled? Do we know which switches do what? Where are your water valves? How do you turn the water off into the building? Now, this could be a large industrial sized building, so you have very large turnoffs, or this could be a simple house museum or a simple collection that has a much smaller turnoff at a water valve, usually on the street. And I say that because it's very important. Recently here in Natchitoches, where I'm located at NCPTT, we had a large ice storm. This is not normal for our region. And people lost water, power, and their water froze all over town. And I was amazed at how many comments I saw on social media where people were saying, my house is flooding, all the pipes are thawing out, there's water everywhere, and I have no idea how to turn my water off. And if you do know how to turn it off, do you have a tool that will turn it off? It takes a special tool like the one in this lower photograph. That's my house, that's the tool it takes. But there are other types of water valves that take triangular cutoffs and things like that. So really important to know how your water is turned off, and if you have the tools and the knowledge to do that. So again, what's the likelihood of disaster happening in the building? Are you in a flood zone? Do you have storage in a basement level? Do you have chemical storage? Are there solvents and chemicals in your building that would react with other objects? So for example, in our labs right now, we have an immense amount of oil, crude oil, because of a study we're doing. If those were impacted, it would be detrimental. Spreading that crude oil around our building would do major damage, where that's not something we normally have on site. So we have to think about that sort of thing. Is there backup power? Do you have a backup generator? Do you know how to use it? I'm always amazed at how many people invest in backup generators only to find out later, when the time comes, it hadn't been serviced properly, they don't have the fuel for it. I hear a lot of people say, well, we didn't even know how to turn it on. So who knows these answers? Who in your staff has the answers? And hopefully it's not one person, and that's a lot of times the case. I've worked with a lot of sites where they've said, oh, well, we have a maintenance guy, Bill does all of this. Well, what happens if you have a water leak, or you have a fire, or some sort of disaster or emergency, and Bill's with his grandkids in Nevada? Bill can't help you. So hopefully this is something you want to sit down, figure out, get the answers, and then we want to train involved. And one great way to do this, and to really get all of these decisions out in the open and figure out what you need, is to construct your own disaster planning tool. And a great one is D-Plan. It's free. You can just search D-Plan online. It'll come up. It's dplan.org. And this will walk you through all of these sort of decisions, help you mitigate disasters and prepare for unlikely emergencies. So it's really important. Like I said, maybe you're a large-scale museum, maybe you're a simple house museum, maybe this is just something, you are a collector and you find your collections are a major part of your life, a major investment. This is something you should have even as an owner, own private collections. All right. So we've made our disaster plan. We've gone on to D-Plan or made just an internal disaster plan. We need to disseminate this. Everyone wants to know. This could be, like I said before, maybe this is just your own personal collection. Do you live with other people? Do you have a close neighbor that you're close with, or a family friend, or a caretaker that you could help, get this information to, that could help you rather? Maybe this is your entire staff, and that's what I recommend. So, for example, at our center, we've made a disaster plan. We've disseminated it. We have a little flip chart that's in everyone's cubicle, and we haven't done it in a while. And this is a good reminder that we need to do it. Is we sit down with a disaster plan, and we've talked about, like, okay, this is what happens if there's a fire. This is how you shut the gas off in these rooms. This is how you turn the water off. So train everyone, have a day, buy a bunch of donuts, bring everyone in, go through your disaster plan, walk them around the building. So one important thing is, so we've trained them, does everyone actually have access to all the things they need? Now, we're not talking about, the generator. I'm thinking really simplistic things like, can everyone on your staff open the utility closet that has the water shut off? Something to think about. A lot of times for security reasons, rooms have limited access. You need to make sure if those rooms have an emergency, or those rooms contain emergency equipment such as your panel boxes, that if not everyone has access, at least one person on staff is always there. Great example, yesterday in our own building, we had a water leak. Person who discovered the water leak could not access the room the water was leaking in. Luckily, someone was there that could, and they were able to turn it off. But it's a great example of, something to think about. Does everyone have access? And then, of course, train all staff. We're going to inform everyone. And do we have supplies? And this could be, as simple as plastic sheeting to put down to protect the floor, buckets, towels, things like that. So something to think about. Do you have a supply closet somewhere that you could keep, mops or sponges or buckets or something like that in case of just a small scale emergency? So one of the things we want to talk about is risk assessment. How much of my stuff is at risk? So in your collection, in your building, do you have artwork, artifacts, maybe business paperwork, loan agreements? These are really important, especially in museums. Who owns what? Who do we need to call if something gets damaged? It's really important, especially with all the sort of paperwork and digital archives, that these are also backed up off-site. So you have some sort of cloud storage or off-site storage for digital records. It's really important because it's very easy to lose those in a large power event, or to lose those in a water event. Those need to be backed up somewhere. And I have this photograph here of of a watercolor. This is a good example. This actually belongs to a museum that we just did some work for. Tornado came through, small house museum. These are original watercolor paintings by Caroline Dorman, a famous naturalist. Tornado tore the building apart. Luckily, the nature preserve that contains these had done a risk assessment and a disaster plan, and realized they did not want their most precious object in a building that was at risk, that did not have good climate control. So they actually had copies made, and the originals were sent to a more qualified archive. So luckily, when the disaster actually hit, none of the original artwork was in the building. So what is your collection made out of? Some materials are obviously much more vulnerable than others. So if you have something like, this photograph is actually from that same house museum, the large collection that was damaged, good to go. Lots of metal, industrial stuff. This is farming, things that were used for planting, was all good. We were able to do some light cleaning, dry them out after the storm, and they were good to go. So it's important to know, well, what kind of things do you have? How are each of those things going to be impacted? And also not only the materials, but is there a priority list? Do you have a monetary value or research value? Maybe you have the one original manuscript that exists from a certain writer. That becomes the most important, not the large collection of first editions, which can probably be replaced if something was to happen. Whereas that one original manuscript couldn't be replaced. So you have to sort of give a value to it and create a prioritized list. So for example, at our facility, and of course we're a research lab, we're not a museum, our most important thing is not our digital data, because that's all backed up off-site. Our most important thing in the building is our original handwritten data. So all of those, when we know a hurricane's coming or hurricane season is here, we actually lock all of those into large Pelican cases, so that if there's a flood or any sort of disaster like that, high winds or buildings compromised, those are going to be safer than anything else. And everything else we pretty much just cover in tarps and hope for the best. So back to our planning. What's most vulnerable? Do we have a plan for those most vulnerable things? Does everyone know, hey, this is our highest priority. This is what has to come out of the building if something's going to happen. This is what needs to be moved if there's an emergency. All right. So who's the building manager? Who's in charge of all this? Are they keeping other people trained? Who's the team involved that's going to help with this? We've got our prioritized list, our list of materials and supplies like plastic and things like that. Do we know where our backup storage is and triage areas? So let's say your structure is damaged from a fire, or you have a flooding event or a water line break, something like that. Do you have a plan as to where the objects could go while you work on the building itself? So if you've never thought about this before, it's probably not best to say, oh, well, we can take them all to the curator's house and put them in their garage. It's good to contact local warehouses, maybe storage places. Do you have a partner that might have space for you? So something to think about in your prior planning. Where could all of these things go if they need to be taken out so we could treat the building or the objects themselves? And also, professional help. Remember, we're talking about being proactive, not reactive. Are there conservators in the area that could help you? Do you have partner or sister organizations that know your collection that could come and help you? Have you contacted some of the management companies, the companies that will come in, dry things out, clean the building? Do you have any of these people on retainer? Your electrician, do you know your plumber that you'll need to call to come help? All right, so our disasters happen, our emergency has happened. What's next? So we need to get back into our building to assess the damage. Is it structurally sound? Are you the person who can make that decision? That's really important. I work with a lot of sites. I'm an architectural conservator. I've worked with a lot of sites who have said, well, we can't decide if the building is safe to re-enter. I'm sure someone on your staff, or like I said before, maybe having that partner or someone you've talked to before that knows, hey, there's been a disaster at my local house museum. I'm the guy that's going to go down and say, this is what's needed. So, have someone already on retainer, that knows the collection, that he or she can come down and assess the structural stability of it. How do we turn the electrical off? And we talked about this. We don't know what's contained inside. You could have gas lines that are broke, water lines that are broke, and of course, if the electricity is still on, or if it miraculously comes on while you're investigating the building, you could have major health issues there. So we want to know that all this is shut off the minute you can get it shut off while you assess what damage has been done. Are there biological materials? Do you have mold? Do you have collections that have we say pathogens, and I'm sure people are scratching their head. Anyone who worked after Rita and Katrina knows there's some really bizarre stuff that gets in the water if you had a large scale event like this. Pesticides, chemicals, and it could be things that are not from your site but local surrounding areas. Is there a processing plant for oil or animals a half a mile away from you and the whole area has been flooded? If so, pretty good chance you have all of their waste now in your building. So PPE, full Tyvek, respirators, the whole 9 yards. Really those in, get those on before you go in. And remember, don't go alone. Doesn't matter how important. I'm the only one there and I've got to see if this painting survived. Just wait. Get someone that's there that can call for help if something happens. Maybe only one person goes in, but someone needs to be outside waiting for them as their safety buddy. Need our PPE. We need to make sure we're getting clean. All this is getting off. Bring clothes to change into before you go home and track the pathogens or the mold spores back home with you. Alleviate stress. Stay hydrated. Talk to people. And document. Take lots of photographs. It's a good chance. I've worked at several sites that one person went in right after and they were the only ones allowed in for weeks sometimes because the building was deemed unsafe for re-entry. So it's really important to get in and take photographs to figure out what you're going to be dealing with when you're allowed to go back in on a more permanent status. Or maybe you're in the eye of the storm, you can get in, check it out, and get back out to sort of be up against. So we've gone in, we've documented, we have our plan ready, and it's time for movement. It's time for triage. What needs to be treated immediately? Our stone sculpture, it's good. Our metalwork, it's good. Let's leave it. We'll get back to it later. We have a collection of architectural salvage. That's going to be fine. Paper objects, fabric objects, wood objects, things that are really critical for any sort of water intrusion or open to the elements, or even things that can't be in an uncontrolled environment. That's our triage. That's what we've got to get first. We've got to get them dried. We've got to get them stable. Maybe we need to get them frozen. All of these are things that we have to think about, and we have to prioritize. We talked about earlier, maybe it's the material that's the priority, maybe it's the monetary or historical value that's the priority, but we need to triage and get those things treated first. And then we need to think about long-term salvage and storage. Where's all this going while we treat the building? Why we redo the floors, why we replace the ceiling, all of that. So I kind of want to close with just some resources that are available to you. Working with emergency responders, this is an FAIC, AIC publication, really good. This will help you learn to work with your local firefighter, your local emergency responders before the disaster and after. And also want to throw a quick plug in, a number that everyone should write down, copy this, the National Heritage Responders. And this is a group of the FAIC, AIC, that will come in. These are volunteers that will come in and help you. And it could be something as simple as a phone call away. This is a hotline that's manned 24/7. Calling them up and saying, hey, just had this, furnace went out and blew soot everywhere. Or, hey, my dehumidifier stopped over the weekend and we didn't know it. Can you help me with this? So a great resource. They'll do everything from deployments to simple, someone on the other end that is going to help you get answers that you might need. So I hope this helped you in some way and it was at least a little bit informative. I know it's a lot of stuff to cover in a very short time, but we're here if you ever need us for anything. Happy to help.
Thanks so much, Jason. And I'd like to add that we'll try to provide a list of other good resources that have aggregates of information in terms of preparation and mitigation and recovery, so that people will have a lot of information that they can choose from depending on what their profile is and what their needs might be. Now I'd like to turn to our next speaker, Richard McAlister. He'll speak on personal resiliency and Red Cross resources. Richard is a meteorologist and multimedia journalist living in the Texas Hill Country. He's a spokesperson for the American Red Cross in Texas, Kansas, and Oklahoma. He also serves as the lead meteorologist for the Southwest and Rocky Mountains Division of the American Red Cross, specializing in tropical weather plan and preparation, in particular for Texas and Louisiana. Richard?
Hello, I'm Red Cross meteorologist Richard McAlister, and I'd like to talk to you about hurricane preparedness. Just a bit about me. I am the incident meteorologist for the Southwest and Rocky Mountain Division of the American Red Cross. I specialize in tropical weather preparedness in the states of Texas and Louisiana. I'm also a spokesperson for the American Red Cross in Texas, Louisiana, Kansas, and Oklahoma. And I'm a co-author of the American Red Cross Tropical Weather Doctrine and Planning Timeline. Before joining the Red Cross, I was the chief meteorologist at USAA Property and Casualty Insurance Company. I also served as an incident meteorologist for the USAA Catastrophe Operations Team. I'm a retired Air Force officer and served as the Director of Tropical Weather Plans and Programs at the Kennedy Space Center. I'm a published author on storm surge inundation and hold a patent for hail detection technology. I've been practicing meteorology and emergency management for over 30 years, and I want you to know disasters will happen, often with little or no warning, and they will overwhelm even the best prepared communities. I want to change the way you think about disasters from a huge mass care event to a collective of personal crisis and tragedies, and I want you to understand that preparedness is your responsibility. It's up to you to prepare yourself, your family, your neighbors, and your community. Don't count on immediate help from the government for at least 3 days. Each of us hold the responsibility to prepare ourselves and our households for disaster. Preparing helps us stay safe, adapt to the challenges that come with disasters, and recover quickly. Your ability to perform your mission after a disaster is contingent upon your personal preparedness before the disaster. At the conclusion of my presentation, you will have the information you need to get a kit, make a plan, and be informed. Let's start with get a kit. There are 3 different types of kits, and you need all 3. There's a bug-in kit, which is a comprehensive supply kit for 3 days to 2 weeks, a bug-out kit, which is a portable supply kit for 3 days, and a mission kit, which is the tools and resources needed to respond and fulfill your recovery mission. All kits should include the personal care items you need to function and may include prescription and over-the-counter medications, prescription eyeglasses and contact lenses, dentures or bridges, hearing aids and earplugs, wheelchairs, a cane, durable medical equipment, batteries, cleaning solution, and a UL-listed power strip. Your kit should include documents to identify you and allow you to conduct business. They might include a driver's license, a photo identification, your passport, or a military identification card. You'll need to have 3 days worth of cash with you, credit and debit cards, your health insurance cards, your professional licensure documents and insurance, and your secure online access credentials. Also include technology and communications devices such as a cell phone and power cord, a laptop computer and power cord, accessories such as a microphone and headphones, a 12-volt adapter, a car charger, or a solar charger. Also include a UL-listed power strip and extra batteries, and a handheld radio transceiver, sometimes called a walkie-talkie. Your kit should also include items required to complete your mission, such as personal protective equipment for your eyes and ears, uniforms and specialized clothing, a computer and power cords, tools and equipment, supplies and materials, documents and manual, and lighting so that you can see as you work. Your kit should also include items required to sustain your life or keep you safe. Include at least 3 days of food per person for every person in your group. Include 1 gallon of water per person per per day at a minimum. Include your personal hygiene kit, a flashlight and extra batteries, an AM/FM radio, and some headphones so you don't disturb others. Include protective shoes, work gloves, durable clothing, sunscreen, and bug spray. Also include items for your comfort and support, such as books and magazines, a personal pillow, games such as chess, checkers, backgammon, playing cards, and dominoes. Bring an activity book or your personal journal. Bring a Nerf ball, and bring spiritual and emotional support books. Prepare a customized kit to meet the needs of every member of your household, including infants, children, teenagers, expectant and new mothers, adults and senior adults, persons with functional needs, service animals, working animals, and pets. Now that you know how to build a kit, let's talk about how to make a plan. Planning should be done in the preseason and requires you know something about your area, the threats you face. You must understand your personal risk tolerance, know routes out of your community. You must understand the timing of tropical weather systems and know something about your destination. You can plan more effectively when you know the geography of your community. Know the name of your county and the surrounding counties. Know your evacuation zone if applicable. Know the name of interstates and roads in your community. Know the name of nearby rivers and streams. Know where low water crossings are located along your routes. Understand where traffic becomes congested, and know shelter locations in your community. A good kit will also include resources where you can find help and information, and might include radio and television stations, reliable websites which publish official information, social media sites where you can get additional information, the name of local leaders, persons in your household who have CPR, first aid, or other medical training, and a list of legitimate relief agencies in your community. Effective planning requires you to know your threats, and I want to change the way you think about threats. It may sound strange, but the hurricane is not really the threat, and when you understand this concept, you can plan more effectively. The actual threats of a hurricane include, but are not limited to, a tree falling on you, water sweeping you away to drown, a wind-blown projectile penetrating your body, electrocution or poisoning, a heart attack or untreated physical injury, deprivation of life-saving medical care, or an encounter with an animal, insects, or amphibian. Effective planning requires you to know your personal risk tolerance and understand something about the way you make decisions. Ask yourself, did you plan thoroughly in the preseason? How much uncertainty is acceptable in your decision-making process? How much time do you have to decide? Can you act quickly after a decision? What is the point of no return, the time when circumstances, not decisions, determine your fate? You need to understand if you can financially afford to act early. You also need to have an accurate understanding of your physical fitness and stamina, because acting late will increase the physical demands on your body. An effective plan requires you to know something about the evacuation routes in your community. You need to know the population of your community and the population density within your community. Know how many ways there are out of your community. Are the roads likely to congest? Are the roads likely to flood? Are the roads currently undergoing construction? Also consider, are you going to be evacuating at night? And when is it too late to start your evacuation? Finally, a good evacuation plan includes information about your destination. Ask yourself, how safe will I be traveling to my destination? Here are some rules of thumb to remember as you're building your evacuation plan. Don't evacuate through danger to reach safety. Don't evacuate to another evacuation zone. Evacuate to the west whenever safe and practical. Follow the instructions of emergency management officials and ensure your destination is safer than the place you're leaving. Now that you understand how to build a kit and make a plan, let's talk about ways to be informed. Being informed in hurricane season includes seeking information about the preseason tropical weather outlook, looking at weather products, understanding the 5-day forecast, and knowing where you can get official news and information. Now, I'm not going to address the 2021 hurricane season because I understand another speaker is addressing that topic, but I am prepared to answer your questions and show you some additional graphics after the presentation. There are many complicated terms and concepts in tropical meteorology, but I'm going to boil boil it down to 6 terms and just one concept you need to be informed. Let's start with the definition of a tropical storm watch and a tropical storm warning. A tropical storm watch is issued when a tropical cyclone containing winds of 39 to 73 miles per hour or higher poses a possible threat, generally within the next 48 hours. These winds may be accompanied by storm surge, coastal flooding, and/or river flooding. The watch does not mean that tropical storm conditions will occur. It only means these conditions are possible within the area. A tropical storm warning is issued when sustained winds of 39 to 73 miles per hour or higher associated with a tropical cyclone are expected in 36 hours or less. These winds may be accompanied by storm surge, coastal flood, and/or river flooding. It's also important you understand the difference between a hurricane watch and a hurricane warning. A hurricane watch is issued when a tropical cyclone containing winds of 74 miles per hour or higher poses a possible threat, generally within 48 hours. These winds may be accompanied by storm surge, coastal flooding, and/or river flooding. The watch does not mean that hurricane conditions will occur. It only means that these conditions are possible. A hurricane warning is issued when sustained winds of 74 miles per hour or higher associated with a tropical cyclone are expected in 36 hours or less. These winds may be accompanied by storm surge, coastal flooding, and/or river flooding. A hurricane warning can remain in effect when dangerously high water or a combination of dangerously high water and exceptionally high waves continue, even though winds may be less than hurricane force. It's important to know the difference between a tropical storm watch, a tropical storm warning, a hurricane watch, and a hurricane warning. But in my opinion, the two most important products issued by the National Hurricane Center for the purposes of planning and preparation are the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds and the most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds. The earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds is the time at a specific location when persons can safely assume conditions will be free from tropical storm force winds. This is the time that has no more than a 10% chance of seeing the onset of sustained tropical storm force winds, the period during which preparation should be made for those with a low risk tolerance. The most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds is the most likely arrival time before or after which the onset of tropical storm force winds are equally likely. This would be more appropriate for persons who are willing to risk not having completed their preparations before the storm. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, the state of Texas, and the American Red Cross plan using the earliest arrival time. I recommend you do the same. Here's how the product is graphically displayed on the National Hurricane Center website. To use the product, find your location on the map and the intersecting timeline. For this example, if you lived in Jacksonville, Florida, you could expect the earliest reasonable arrival of tropical storm force winds Sunday at 8 a.m. This is the time by which all preparation should be complete. Injuries and fatalities increase exponentially when winds exceed 39 miles per hour. Evacuation timelines are designed to complete before winds exceed 39 miles per hour. This is the gold standard, the anchor point. You can figuratively forget every other product published by the Hurricane Center if you understand this concept. To help you remember this important concept, I want everybody watching this video to place your hands above your head in an inverted V shape like roof rafters and repeat after me. It's shelter time by 39. It's shelter time by 39. Good hurricane preparedness means you execute your plans, finish your work, and get to a safe place before the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds, 39 miles per hour. You can get reliable forecast information, including the earliest reasonable arrival time of tropical storm force winds at the National Hurricane Center website. Additionally, the American Red Cross maintains a virtual library of disaster preparedness and planning resources. Search the term Red Cross Emergency Library for free access. Please download the Red Cross Emergency app from your favorite app store to receive emergency alerts and notifications. For more local information, subscribe to the Red Cross Texas Weather Update on YouTube or follow the American Red Cross serving Central and South Texas on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn. Or you can just send me an email and I'll register you for weather updates. During this presentation, you've learned that being prepared means building a kit, making a plan, and staying informed. I'm Red Cross Meteorologist Richard McAllister, thanking you for your time and attention. Please be Red Cross ready.
Well, thanks very much, Richard.
Hello, I'm Red Cross Meteorologist. Hello,
Okay, this is Steve Pine back again. I think we're ready to get into some of the questions that have come up that are on people's mind that have been putting into the question and answer section at the top of the screen. And many of them are linked actually. And what I think we'll find is that as we start to talk about one, the other ones will follow. And I'd like to start off with, as consumers of weather data, we often see a variety of models that are predicting different path projections. How do we make decisions based on what we see from various different models? And is there an aggregate that we should follow? Dan, is there something that we could use as a more reliable guide to inform us?
Great question. I think the best advice is to go with the Hurricane Center's forecast and their cone. Their cone accounts for some of the spread and uncertainty in the track. It has been found that the average of all the reliable models outperforms any individual model, if you follow what I'm saying. So, officially we discourage the use of looking at all those lines, the so-called spaghetti charts. But there is information that you can gather. If there's a large spread in the different models, you have some idea that there's a lot of uncertainty. And if there's a lot of clustering in one zone, one area, that may give you more confidence. But bottom line, there's a handful of models that work the best, the GFS, the European, and then the Hurricane Center uses a lot of what are called consensus models, which do averages of the more reliable models. And those are the ones that are the hardest to beat. Just to get back, my advice is to focus on the Hurricane Center's official forecast and not any individual lines on that map.
Perfect. That makes so much sense. A couple of our participants asked for some feedback about what factors lead to hurricanes impacting much further inland than what we typically think of as well, this is what's going to happen on the coastline. But how can we make decisions based on what might happen 40 or 50 miles inland that may be as simple as we just need to keep an eye open, or we need to actually board up our house or move things out of harm's way, whether it's our family or personal effects.
Well, I can say with the National Weather Service, we're trying to address all the hazards, including wind. And the recipe for big wind impacts far inland would be a high category storm moving quickly. So last year we had Zeta, which fit that bill. It came in Mississippi, southeast Louisiana, moving quickly, and it had tremendous wind damage all the way across through Georgia. So that's one example. But my advice is, to look at the details of the forecast, and we'll try to lay it out for you, as will Red Cross and their Texas weather briefings. As far as what to expect in different areas. The other thing I want to mention is the flooding rains. That can be a very significant impact well inland. And so just because you're away from the coast doesn't mean you're not going to be impacted very severely by the storm.
Someone else had asked if we could discuss the decision process on when to start preparations, such as putting up shutters and putting away artifacts. Seems that forecasts on intensity, direction, and the speed of storms kind of are difficult for us as consumers to sort through. The general decision on when to activate a hurricane preparedness plan is probably one of the most difficult decisions to make, because it's often, if you're either, if it's personal, you're not going to work because you're staying home to take care of family. You're making plans to leave. You might actually leave. If you're at an institution or somewhere where you're managing a collection, you may have in your hurricane plans a stepwise process of putting things aside, making things be better protected in some way or another, so that there's less potential for damage. So any of the group can chime in on what they think of from their point of view and what they've experienced as to how that process comes about.
Steve, let me jump in and see if I can address that because I am a co-author on the Red Cross planning timeline. We begin every year by looking at the season forecast, and then we have a 160-hour timeline that we begin to implement every tropical season with every storm. And we are watching that those systems develop even in the Atlantic, in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico. Wherever they occur, we're watching them, and we're calculating the path of that storm against that earliest arrival time of tropical storm force winds at 39 miles per hour that I mentioned. So the question is, when is the best time to start planning? And the answer is right now. You need to start planning right now. There are resources available from the American Red Cross. There are resources available from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and also some resources available from the National Hurricane Center that can help you build that timeline of what do you want to do 120 hours out, 100 hours out, 72 hours out. Another source for information is look to local business continuity planners in your community. There is a group out there known as the Association of Continuity Planners, and they are located in and near almost every big city in the United States. And these are people that work at the corporate level to plan for major disasters and emergencies. And they would be very happy to help you with that, as would the Red Cross.
Excellent. Jason, would you have a take on that?
No, those were fantastic answers. The only thing I can say from unfortunate experience is not to wait too late. I've worked at several institutions that started and were never able to finish because it was already time to go. I myself was on an emergency team that was activated to shutter windows on a 2-story building, and we already had 30-mile-an-hour winds by that point. That is not a fun thing, I can tell you, to try to put up sheets of plywood and 30-mile-an-hour winds. So when in doubt, go ahead and prepare.
I completely agree. At the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, we've made plans for how we prepare, and the way we've done it is getting all those components of all the departments that have an impact on safety and collection care to identify what their needs would be. And once we've identified our needs, we then identify what resources we need to meet those needs. And part of that is recognizing how long it takes to achieve those ends. So then we can build out whether or not there's what we need to do 1 day out, 2 days out, 3 days out. And then we can make an assumption about when it is before the hurricane or storm becomes imminent that we need to start to implement some of those things. And we've identified, the materials we need to make that happen, and the people we need to have those plans implemented. So it's something it's a process, and as Richard says, you start that process now. Actually, you make those plans, you have those discussions, you look around and you see what your needs might be, what your vulnerabilities will be, and based on that plan, you can make informed decisions. And you won't cover everything perfectly, but at least you'll have a foundation on which to build and improve year after year.
Steve, the most important resource in a plan is the one that's most often overlooked, and that's the people. Because if the people who are going to execute your plan are not prepared and resilient, then they won't be available to carry out all of those other wonderful plans. So make sure you take care of your folks early in the process.
Yes, yes, and that the decision making is not limited to one or two people, because it's so often the case that somebody that is in the chain of command that is responsible for so much of this might not be available at the time that it's needed to make some of these decisions. So that everybody should be at least somewhat aware of what other roles are involved in the process, and that so that if there's a written plan, then someone can at least refer to it, and you can have some way of being able to bridge some of those gaps. Now, one of the things that we're getting in terms of questions is making sure that we can provide resources for people to go and do further reading, and find links to some of the great material that's already out there, that's been considered, that's been tried and true and tested. And we will provide a link to that. Perhaps we're able to put it on the chat. We'll investigate that as we're talking a little bit more. But all the participants should know that we're going to make a effort to post all the references that Richard, Jason, and Dan might reference, and that I think that you can make sure that you touch base with your local government authorities. That there's usually a lot of information available through your local emergency planners. We have Reddy Harris here in Harris County in the Houston area for general information, in addition to knowing that there are such resources as the HAA, which has a great set of reference materials there. NCPTT, you can go to their website for this sort of thing. TX-CERA posts a lot of material that we generate, but that also we glean from other organizations that have done a lot of this work as well, whether it's on the East Coast, the Midwest, national or local folks. The Texas Historical Commission has reference material as well that can be very useful, at least in the Texas area. But they're models that are applicable across the municipalities and different boundaries. The HENTEF, which is the Heritage Emergency National Task Force that is associated with that national Heritage Responders Group that is also associated with AIC, that Jason mentioned, is also another great library of reference tools, whether they're videos or they're written materials. It's there's a lot of stuff out there that people can access, and we'll try to give a good bibliography to the folks that are in attendance. I'd like to ask each of our speakers to comment, if they would, on based on their experience, how their experience has informed how they personally prepare at home for storms, and if they've covered all the bases, or there's still some gaps that they feel they prefer to be able to cover. Because this is all well and good to talk about how we might work with preparing institutions, but as Richard pointed out, it's if the people aren't all prepared, then they don't have the same capacity to pitch in to help with an organization. So could each of you say anything at all about how living this life and having this information and these experiences has changed the way you approach getting yourself prepared? Richard? Dan and Jason?
Go ahead, Jason.
Thanks, Richard, for putting me on the spot. For me, and Richard's presentation was a great one. Growing up originally on the coast of North Carolina and in Wilmington, hitting hurricanes, and then moving to Savannah, then here in Louisiana, I've sort of grown up used to it. So I have my kits like Richard talked about. We refresh them every year when hurricane season's coming. We've got everything. I replenish all the gas for my generator at home and that sort of thing. But one of the things I don't know how to answer, but if we had to full scale evacuate something like, luckily we were a little far out of the path when Rita and Katrina hit to do any major damage, but I know it'd have to be a tough decision that we could get the family safely and the pets and all of the stuff to survive a trip to safety, but all the artwork that we have would have to stay in the house. And that's hard to think about. But we'd have to sort of leave all of that behind, a life of collection behind. So that's what I struggle with.
Steve, I think that after every disaster that I go to, and I've been to many disaster locations. I deployed last year for Hannah, Laura, Beta, Delta, and Zeta, and I'm currently deployed in support of the Hondo tornado right now, which had hailstones so big that it not only punched through the roof, but it punched through the ceiling of some houses and allowed subsequent rainfall to flood the inside of the house. And you don't typically think about hail coming all the way through the ceiling and coming all the way into your living room, but such was the case near Hondo, Texas last week. But every time I go to these, I begin to understand that the real key to the real key components of loss involve a failure of imagination. And that is, we never really imagined that it could be as bad as it was, no matter how much time and effort and planning you put into it. There are always things that are going to happen. During the Texas ice storm, for example, we had no way of knowing that there were going to be over 80 deaths that were related to carbon monoxide poisoning. So it's not always the immediate event like the hurricane that's the threat. It's what happens afterwards. Does someone have a heart attack while they're trying to cut up trees in their yard and get their car back out of their driveway? Does someone have carbon monoxide poisoning from running a generator? Does somebody eat food that has been tainted or gone bad and suffer botulism? It's always the secondary and tertiary effects that seem to be the hardest to imagine.
Yeah, I would say for me, it's my lane is briefing elected officials, partners in the region on what's coming and that they need to take it seriously, but it may be outside their experience. Hurricane Harvey, a perfect example. Before it started to rain, we briefed 15 to 30 inches, locally 40, with catastrophic flooding expected. And I thought after briefing that, people would be like, wow, it didn't happen like you said. But no, they thought, oh, it's a lot worse than I thought, because it hasn't happened to me. I couldn't envision it. The ice storm was a great example too. We briefed impacts on power, heat, water. Of course, we didn't expect a total failure of the grid. And so for me on a personal level, it's getting my family out of the way when necessary, getting them evacuated to safety so that we can focus on, our role as briefing, the region on what to expect. And something like Laura was very frightening because that was the type of storm that could do serious damage to my home and put my family at risk. So that's when it gets very real and very stressful for me.
Dan, do you have to ride out a storm at an operations center?
Yes, the Weather Service office locally is in with the Galveston County Office of Emergency Management. So it is a sturdy structure. So I would be relatively safe. But our home is probably rated to a Category 1 type wind. So there's only been a few times when it got really concerning on a personal level. Of course, a storm like Harvey and a near miss like Laura. And of course, we had Hurricane Ike come right over this area too. So that's when it gets really challenging. But I thought Richard's observation about lack of imagination was very important, because I've seen that so many times. No matter what we are trying to communicate, to get people to personalize that to them. Oh, I was muted that whole time.
No. We heard you.
Oh, okay.
No, I would have warned you.
Okay. But yeah, that's the thing, is getting people to imagine what could happen, get them to believe what you're trying to communicate, because our job is to really ring the bell, when it's something that you really need to be concerned about, not over dramatize those lesser events. But I'm finding that many people don't. If they haven't experienced that, it's very hard for them to react.
We have another interesting question that's come up. So some of our participants are attached to libraries or work at libraries, and sometimes they're put into service as shelters, because they're publicly funded, and they usually have staff that are capable of jumping into a wide variety of roles. And our question has to do with asking if there are any good resources for how to run a hurricane shelter that a librarian may be able to read up on and be informed about what might be coming and what might be asked of them. Richard?
Steve, that is a huge part of our mission, is educating people how to run shelters, how to prepare shelters, how to do structural analysis on shelters, how to transport people in, how to keep them, how to feed them, how to take care of their pets. We would be delighted for any librarian or any library that has that as a part of their public service mission to spend hours with them as they need, exploring how to shelter people in a disaster situation. We have an entire section that is devoted just to an entire group of people that are devoted to nothing but shelter preparedness and mass casualty preparedness. And if you will get in contact with your local Red Cross chapter and ask that question, they will absolutely be delighted that you did.
Yes. Fantastic. You were the right person to ask. I'm checking my list of questions, and I'm not seeing other ones coming through. So I think, is there anything else that any of our presenters have thought that you wish you had added to your presentation that you'd just like to add at this point, or to emphasize before we sign off?
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in real quick and throw out, from my deployments and being a conservator, one thing is just, I know this is going to be really hard. It's not even isn't even going to come across well, but to try to stay positive and to really breathe before you make any decisions about your collection once it's been impacted. I've come in so many times to find out, well, we couldn't save any of that, we threw it all away. Whereas a lot of it probably could have been saved. There's just that such a depression that hits you instantly afterwards. This is your whole life's work. This is, financially a huge loss, culturally a huge loss, and a lot of times people make that decision just to toss everything immediately. And during the cleanup, it's all got to go, and you go in to say, well, no, that the stuff's sitting on the curb, we can still save. So there's a lot of things, I think, professionally, that conservators can definitely save that might get thrown out. And so it's something to think about if you don't have conservators on staff, or if you're not familiar with that and you're in a prone area maybe, or just to talk to them beforehand and say, what would it take, would these things, if impacted, be salvageable, that sort of thing. But at any rate, for my 2 cents, take a breather, make some decisions before you toss everything.
Steve, I'd like to recommend that organizations form a mutual aid agreement with other organizations of the similar type outside of the area. For example, you're located in Houston and you have a certain set of threats and risks that are appropriate to Houston. If something bad starts to happen in your area, it might be good to have an agreement with a museum in Denver, Colorado, or maybe Oklahoma City, somebody that you could lean upon to provide services while your folks are recovering from the disaster. And then in turn, what you do is you offer them a reciprocal agreement that says, okay, Denver, whenever you get snowed in and you need somebody to take over operations, we will pitch in and help out as much as we can. I know that Dan does that with the National Weather Service. Whenever Galveston is threatened, Lake Charles will jump in and take over. Whenever Lake Charles is threatened, Austin, San Antonio will jump in and take over. And a lot of companies, and even the Red Cross does that. So that would be my recommendation.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you think. I like the way you think. And that it's actually something that we are active in, and always striving to improve on that connectivity that the American Institute for Conservation and HENTEF and the Alliance for Response groups across the country all try to do that. But the more connected we are, the easier it will always be, because so often, as I know Jason would recognize as well, sometimes the call you get that was most memorable and most needed for help comes from somebody that didn't know that there was help available. So that sense of connectivity, knowing what's out there, that there are other people that can help, and finding ways of being able to keep that connective tissue alive is what makes all the difference between losing everything or a respectable outcome that you can live with. Dan, did you have something that you could add on that question?
Just very quickly, I put in the chat a link to a local preparedness guide with a lot of information on all hazards, not just hurricanes. It applies especially to the Houston-Galveston region, but there, of course, there's information in there, much as with Richard's presentation, that applies to all. So it's just another resource to take a look at.
Good. Thank you. Thank you. We'll make good use of that. Last question was that someone was asking whether or not there are resources for information about preparation for organizations that work with youth and the public in your buildings. I'm not clear whether or not that would be something that might be akin to libraries, or that it's sort of social organizations. But I would have a feeling that the Red Cross would have generated some good advice on that. Is that true, Richard?
Yes, we have a number of programs for children, for young children, middle-aged children, and for teenagers. Some of the programs one of the programs is called Pillowcase Project. That's for younger children. That's for children. Younger children, there's a program called Preparedness with Pedro, which we will teach any and all of these classes. We'll come to your school, we'll come to your business, or we'll even teach them remotely in the COVID environment to help you prepare and to help children prepare for disasters. As a matter of fact, I taught a pillowcase project class yesterday for 3 elementary schools in Texas. So we would be glad to help you with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I think we've run just a little bit over time, but for good reason, because there's a lot to discuss and we're just scratching the surface in many cases. So I'd like to see if Mary or Melanie, you'd like to say anything before we close out.
This is Mary Striegel. I just wanted to thank our speakers and thank you, Steve, for being the coordinator and moderator for this panel. I think it's gone very well today. I want to give a special thanks to Colby Wilson, who helped technically make this happen. You know, the behind the scenes work that it takes to put a webinar on, most people don't see, and he did an excellent job. Lauren, I'll toss it to you.
Thanks, Mary. Again, on behalf of HAA, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. A special thank you to the presenters who came today. We appreciate you giving this information to our community. We will be sending out a 2 to 3 question survey. Basically, just did you find this useful, so that we know whether this is worth doing again next year in your email inboxes. And if you don't mind responding to that, it will be anonymous. We will not keep track of who says what. And if you have any questions, you can email any of the people that you have seen today. This webinar will be available on the internet in various places in the next couple of days. So again, thank you so much. Be prepared, be ready, and ask questions if you need. And thank you to everyone for coming.
Thank you all.